Welcome to the starry-eyed effect. I'm Steph.
And I'm Brendan.
And I'm Jen. On this podcast, we'll be chatting about all things Williams syndrome.
The ups and downs.
And what it's like living with Williams syndrome.
We're excited to share our community with you. Thanks for being here. Hello, Jen. How are you?
Good, Jen. How are you?
Happy September.
Yeah, happy September. Yeah, it's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, this kind of last few episodes, we've been focusing on school-related topics, which you're so lucky. You don't have to be in school anymore. Do you feel lucky?
Yeah, lucky to an extent.
Early. School, a lot of people with Williams syndrome like school. Did you enjoy school?
Parts of it were better than some of the other parts, so I enjoyed it to an extent, you could say.
What was your favorite class?
Music, always. Music or chorus, it's where I could relate to most of the people, when we were in class together. Outside of class, it was a bit different, Yeah,
it's shocking that you're in a band now.
What was your favorite class, Jen?
Oh, what was my favorite class? Dude, I don't know. Actually, can I tell you guys a quick story? This is a quick story. My mom just passed away a couple months ago. I was at my dad's house the other day cleaning their closet. I found a report card for my brother and I. I had this vision that I was a pretty good student, and I was not. I don't know. It was a very surprise. So I worked a lot in school, and I think that was evident in my grades.
Yeah.
But school is very important for me as a parent now, for my kiddo, Stella. And today our guest, Lenny, is so awesome that this is just going to be the whole episode. We're just going to plop it in here just like we made it.
Shout out to Michelle.
Yeah. So Michelle's self is formally now on the WSA consultant team as the IEP transition consultant. She is our advocate that we use personally for Stella and our IEP journey. She has a lot of experience. She's worked for over 20 years with students with disabilities, with Williams syndrome specifically.
Her son has Williams syndrome.
Her son, yes, has Williams syndrome. She has a PhD in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis on special education. And most recently, until she and her family moved to Disney, she was an adjunct professor at Bowling Green State University. Michelle is awesome. I think you guys are going to love hearing what she has to say about IEPs. This episode was just chock full of little nuggets, don't you think?
Oh my God, yeah. Nugget after nugget after nugget. It was great.
Yeah, it was this is just, you guys, it's good. Take a listen. You won't regret it. Let us know what you think. Okay, until then.
Go Larks. Well, hello, Michelle. How are you?
I'm good. Hi, Brendan. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello. How are you?
We're great.
So, for those who don't know who you are, why don't you tell everyone about yourself and what you do?
Okay. Well, I'm Michelle, and I have a 23-year-old son with Williams syndrome. But I also, once he was starting kindergarten, I decided I wanted to be up on education. I kept hearing the word inclusion. I wanted to understand it. So I went back and got a PhD in curriculum and instruction and became a college professor. So I taught for many years at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. And one of the things I taught early childhood education, special education majors, how to write IEPs and how to evaluate their students and how to write that triennial, their part as teachers, the triennial. So I would do that. I would teach 2 or 3 classes. I was an adjunct professor, and I would teach 2 or 3 classes each semester. And then I also would work with families. And so I started, it's been probably 15 years or so, really working with families from all over the place. I was living in Ohio at the time, so I did lots of different types of disabilities, but also Williams syndrome became, my area because I had a son with Williams syndrome and I still have him. And so so I slowly did a lot more families, worked with a lot more families with Williams syndrome. So I've worked across the country and actually overseas. I've looked at a couple IEPs from other countries also. They don't call it an IEP, but the same information is there. Right. And so I worked with hundreds of families now. I have IEPs, several drawers of them, file drawers filled with just families with kids with Williams syndrome. So it's fun. I enjoy it. And recently I've started working with the WSA as a contract employee doing advocacy. So if you need help, I can provide 2 hours of looking at IEPs, attending your meeting, helping you out in any way that you want through the WSA. So please, I'm always willing.
That's awesome.
Thanks, Brendan.
So Michelle is actually our advocate that we use here for Stella, and we're so thankful to have you. We were trying to remember when you first came into our lives, but I think it was somewhere where around Stella being in 2nd grade. And I would just say to those that are listening, whether you have a great education team or you have a lot of opportunities in terms of education, having an advocate, I think, is so critically important. I've learned a lot from you in terms of how to work with education teams. I've learned a lot about what Williams syndrome students all over the country are doing, and kind of where to push and where to bite my lip.
Hard though, isn't it?
It is hard, but I think that having all that to say, having somebody at the table that is not a parent, but has a background either in Williams syndrome, in advocacy for disabilities, or has a background in teaching is so very important, because I feel like I could say something to a teacher or an education team and they just look at me like the crazy mom, but then Michelle says it in a wonderfully eloquent way, and they're like, oh yes, that totally makes sense to us. All that to say, have you seen that across the country? Like, it feels like having another person at the table that's on your side, that is helping advocate for your child, is just a game changer.
Unfortunately, I do. People say, well, they didn't talk to me that way before you came into the meeting. And it's like, it's unfortunate because they should respect you and what you're saying about your child, because you do know them the best. Don't go to the meetings by yourself. I can't imagine, even as a parent that had the education and the advocacy background, ever attending meetings by myself. So I think that's important. Hey, Brendan, did you ever attend your IEP meetings?
I did. It was rough.
It's rough. And we did that, Alex, my son, we started in high school, first just having him come in to talk about what he wanted out of school. And then eventually he got so he would stay the whole meeting. But, when it was controversial, and we've started doing that with Stella too. Don't we have Stella in our meetings for at least a short time? It's easy now that they're Zoomed, that, they don't have to be in a room with everybody. But it's important, at least when they're middle school, high school. By high school, we really need to have, don't you agree, Brendan, that they need to be in the meetings?
They at most definitely, yeah. At least for
part of it. I look at what do the parents want, and what are their long-term goals? What do the parents want? Where is the student when some students I don't start working with till they're in high school. Some students I start working with when they're in preschool. So it's, looking across and saying, what is our goal? And sometimes inclusion might not be fully included every class all day long. It might be a part of it, so that they can get that reading help or they can get the math help. It might look different, but I will work with the family, and sometimes it doesn't happen overnight. And I've had some successes, which are, I look at them now. I've got students that are in high school that I started with them when they were in preschool, kindergarten, and and I went to their meetings, and, they were like in a self-contained class, and the mom's like, I don't want that. I want them in, included. I want them in regular classes. And we, the first teacher's like, this is not going to work. They can't write. I'm like, writing has nothing to do with being in a class. No. And we would work with them. And by the next year, it was a little bit better. And by the next year, and now the students in high school, and they're like, he's in the right place. You're right. They're like, you don't want him in any other classes. You want him in these co-taught, these great classes we've got, right? We're like, oh, absolutely. In junior high, they said, oh, they don't do co-taught classes at this particular school. And we're like, all right, well, then he'll just attend regular classes. Co-taught are when you've got a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher in the same class together. Yeah. So that you've got two teachers that can kind of piggyback each other, and they can help all the students, not just the student on an IEP. When it's done really well, you don't know which is which. The teachers work together and they teach together. When I'm working with a family, the first thing I look at is placement. The goals are important, but where they're spending most of their day, to me, is the most important piece, because you learn so much in a regular classroom. And if it's only for, specials or electives or whatever it is, then we want to make sure we're getting the most out of those. If that's what the family wants, well, we want to make sure we're getting the most out of it. So I really look at that placement. Where are they getting their education? And then we move to the goals, the accommodations, the modifications, because those accommodations, like getting their paperwork in advance or getting somebody to write for them, things like that. I went through Partners in Policymaking, which is a national group too. I had gone through that in Ohio before I started my PhD. So I had learned about inclusion, and IDEA does not mention inclusion. Anyway, the word inclusion is not there. Least restrictive environment is, though. And so that's what you have to use as the buzzword to say, well, the least restrictive environment.
In elementary school, for those that are listening that have kids that are in elementary school, it's really important to evaluate if your child is getting services, if they're pull-out services, like Michelle was saying, where they go into a resource room, or if they're push-in. But I think the push-in services are better for all the reasons that you stated, Michelle. Like the kids are in the classroom, they're doing the classroom work that the other kids are doing. They're not continuing to widen that gap. There are ways to make those modifications and accommodations dynamically within the classroom to keep somebody within curriculum and give them the extra support that they need. Can you suggest, Michelle, like to the group, just advocacy wise, like things that you see in IEPs that you go, I know these things are helpful for our kids, generally speaking?
One thing that I wanted to point out too is you can call an IEP meeting at any time. So if you listen to this and you go, oh, I want things changed, but we had a meeting last week, or our meeting's not due till February, you can call a meeting tomorrow and say, I'm requesting, and do it in an email so that you have documentation showing you requested it. But you can request, send it to the special ed, whoever the case manager is, send it to the principal and say, I want an IEP meeting. I listened to a podcast and I think that we need to make some changes. So just be aware that you have that ability to make that. And a lot of parents don't understand that they can call that meeting at any time. So please
we feel bad about it.
But you don't, because this is your child. Because I always look at it as, if I'm calling meeting, I'm there also, I'm helping the teacher, because I'm explaining how things could work and do better. And, that, hey, things aren't going quite right now, but hey, if we do this, it'll go better. So, I'm there to, give suggestions on how to improve things too. So don't ever feel bad that you're calling a meeting. I mean, I've had it in some families where there was such bad communication when the school, that we wrote in an accommodation that there would be monthly meetings, that we're going to meet monthly. And then if they call the meeting and the parents don't feel they need it, parents could cancel. Right. And say, hey, we don't need one this month. Everything's going fine. But if they've got it on the books, that it's going to happen. And they were short. They weren't, the 3-hour meetings or anything like that, or 2-hour meetings. They were, 30-minute meetings, because we're catching things as they're happening. So for one, just realize you can have that meeting. Accommodation wise, obviously the paper pencil piece is big. That there are kids with Williams syndrome, adults that write fine, but it's few and far between. Also, a lot of them don't get that muscle memory. So they're always sitting there thinking, okay, how do I make an A? How do I make, it just takes them longer even to write something. And in the meantime, they're missing stuff on the board, or they're missing, they're taking so long that they're going to write a sentence that's the shortest sentence they can write because, I don't want to have to, spend too much time writing a sentence. And I'm not, Brendan, you may write just fine and love to write, but most people
chicken scratch.
Well, and honestly, most people are, use their computer, their phone, everything else to do it anyway. You don't, I still write because I'm old and, that's still in my blood. But for the most part, people don't. I mean, we, can use Alexa to help us with things. We can do all sorts of ways to never write. So, our kids need to start thinking that way. And, parents need to start thinking that way early on. They can still work on having, I believe, a signature is important. You need a signature, right, Brendan? Because you do need to, like, your IDs, and you do need to sign paperwork for work and things like that. But other than that, you can pretty much get away with not writing. So getting that signature, and it does not have to be beautiful, because I'm guessing that most of us don't have like the perfect signature, but it's consistent signature.
Right.
After that, then you really should be thinking about, how do I accommodate the fact that handwriting is going to be tough? So like, now with Stella in 7th grade, they have to take notes a lot of times in 7th grade. So for a 7th grader, it would be getting a copy of the notes so that they can at least follow along and highlight, and teaching them what keywords to highlight. But having it in front of them versus them looking at a board up ahead. Getting, study guides in advance so that they know exactly what to study.
Yeah, I always thought that study guides were super important and super helpful, because then
focus, right?
Help you focus, not be so stressed out about it, be able to like breathe and be like, oh, okay, this is what they were actually talking about, so I could focus somewhat. Right.
And know what? And by the time we got to high school, we tell them we wanted the study guide with answers, and that we would keep the answers. He could just have the study guide so that we would know whether he was like studying the right stuff or not. Because I got tired of reading the novels, because I would read every novel Alex had to read so that I could ask him the questions and things, but I had other things to do and I didn't want to do it anymore. So asking for those when they're younger, things that I look for, and all the way through school, if they do have para support, making sure there's not a chair right next to them so that para can't sit on top of them. Don't you agree, Brendan? You don't want an adult.
Yeah,
because you can't be part of the class if you've got an adult attached.
Independence is very important.
Absolutely. And, and we want that for our kids to be as independent as they possibly can. And it's going to look different for each child, for each adult, but we want them, to live their best life. And that's one of the reasons 3 days in advance, like they might give everybody a study guide on the day before, but it takes longer sometimes to process information. Plus, you might have therapy, you might have, dance class. And, you're worn out after your dance class. So you don't want it the day before, and that happens to be dance day, and, and dance or whatever your, extracurricular activities are important. We never wanted him to miss out on any extracurriculars because, you've got to study for a test tonight. So, that's why we also ask for stuff in advance.
Right. Like back then when I, in high school and stuff, if I got like a study guide like the day before, it would be a full send for me. Like it just send me right through the roof. And, I was going through a lot of health problems as it is. I lost 25 pounds due to stress. I had a cardiac catheterization and spent 5 days in the hospital. I was being bullied a lot. So just all of that with, the schoolwork in of itself, it was really tough.
Right. To your points. That's a lot to deal with.
It is. And we taught like the amount of schoolwork we finally got. So we would say, all right, let's have him do what he needs to so that he understands the material. He doesn't need to do 25 math problems. And usually the last two are like to test your knowledge to see if you can go above and beyond. my husband go, he's not doing those. We want him to understand what he needs to do well, in math, but he's not going to be a math genius. So we don't need to do those last couple problems. You don't need to, try to trip him up on stuff. Trip him up on what's going on. We had teachers that would try to say, well, we'll give him the study guide the day before, but he can take the test 3 days later after his peers take it. Well, that doesn't work because then they're missing something to go take the test while everybody else is, in class doing something and they're pulled out then to take the test.
That makes sense to me.
No, that doesn't work. Now one of the other things for taking tests though, he did take his tests in another room by himself because he found that reading it out loud helped him to process it. That would make sure for attention issues too. And I've done this with other kids that have just, ADHD as their diagnosis, that we put in there that they have to read the tests out loud, or they need to be told they should be reading the tests out loud, because you get lost in the sentences, you get lost in that paragraph.
Mm-hmm. So
reading it out loud would make sure that they were staying on task and they were reading it. And because our kids are so, the music, the sound, they're more audio learners.
Yeah.
That helps them to process it by hearing it while they're doing it. So he would have to which would force then that he takes his test by himself in a room. It's that type of thing that it really does help to process, that audio processing. When you say things out loud, it's like, oh, okay, yeah. And sometimes you're listening to people and you're going, but you're not really listening to them. But if you have to say it back, it helps. I found that with younger kids with Williams syndrome that keep asking the same question over and over again. You've run into a few of those, Brendan. That if you say, all right, well, tell me what I just said. And if they say it, then it's in, where otherwise they're going to keep asking you over and over. But if you say, hey, do this, they can. So, it's important that we look at, if they have anxieties over the fire alarms, well, what can they get away with? Can they get away with just being the first one out of the classroom? Do they need earmuffs? Do they need to be told in advance, like seconds before, because you can't tell them way in advance or they'll never get anything done that day? What they need to make it work. And you want the least, if getting them out, putting them in the front of the line and getting them out of the first is enough, then that's all you want to do, because you don't want to turn it into a big process where we've got to carry earmuffs around just in case it occurs in another room. But if it requires, I've known students with Williams syndrome that have been able to they pull them and they get to pull the alarm so that they have that feeling of control. You want to have them do what everybody else is doing, if that's all it takes. And then you work your way back to what do they really need, so that anxiety piece, you're right, Jen and Brendan, that, that's not taking over and it's affecting their education.
I also would say, in IEPs, what I have learned by using an advocate is that, it's okay to ask for things, right? It's okay to ask, except for a meeting, because I feel bad about that, but I'm getting over that slowly.
Please don't feel bad, Jen. Please don't.
Oh my God, I'm like, oh God, I have to call a meeting. I don't want to. I really try not to. But it's like, you think about these things, right? It's all these things that Michelle was talking about. And it's like, well, my kid would learn better if we just did this one little thing. Well, ask, right? There's usually a solution. Maybe the schools say, no, they can't do it. Maybe they'll say, yes, they can. Or maybe sometimes what often happens is there's an in-between, there's a compromise. And all of the things that you're sharing overall, I think, are really easy, creative ways to tap into how our students best learn. And I would encourage those that are listening to this who are, maybe you're not struggling with an IEP, but maybe you're not maxing out your kiddo's capabilities, right? Let's look at that IEP again. Where can we leverage strengths and make some tweaks, right, to vastly improve performance and retention and happiness, right? And again, if you're focused on inclusion, promote an effort of inclusion, and I think a lot of the tools and strategies that you're talking about, Michelle, are things that other kids with disabilities and or typical kids can use as well.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. But, it can't. I don't sit there and go, oh, we must have a Williams syndrome list. Now, I look at, all right, what's really worked and what have I found that's worked over time with a lot of the students I've worked with. And, and I've kind of put together some lists of here's some things, or when you're transitioning, the transition piece has been an issue for lots of families, that high school and then graduating. And so I've been working on putting together a checklist for those years. But, it's really looking at what do you want and how do you get there? And, it's working on that vision, and then, looking at the placement. And some districts are really bad and they're like, well, this is where your child belongs. And, so we go, well, if you're going to put them there, how about, what classes could they be in? Gen Ed. How do we show you that that's really not the best placement? How do we get you to learn about supports? And it might not happen the first year. It may be a process to get them to where, they're included more often than not. But we've worked, I've worked with districts all over where we build that, and you don't want to, I personally, when I first started, I was like, that's the law and, you need to do this. I've learned it works better if we can convince them that they want to be part of that team and look how this could be so amazing for you. Like you can make this work, and how cool would it be for you to see her graduate and get a regular diploma. So it's trying to make them part of that team and see and get excited about it. And so I try to do that more often now than, say, well, that's the law and you can do that. They know I know the law. I mean, I throw buzzwords at them about least restrictive environment and how are we going to make, provide the supports necessary for that least restrictive environment. So, it's that type of thing that we can really work with and try to make it a team so that, like Jen, you said, now things go pretty well. You're not pushing as hard as you had to. You're still tweaking. We always are tweaking. I mean, I tweaked all the way through till I held the huge party when he graduated. I told him there were going to be fireworks, and then I didn't, have fireworks because it's illegal in Ohio to have fireworks. Go off at your home. But he does have he hates fireworks, by the way. So he really didn't want them. And he has to hear them. And fireworks are a big thing for him. He does not like them, but go off at exactly the time that he gets off work every night when he's at work. So he carries loops, the little earbuds to put in his ears. And if he remembers them, he has them on. If he forgets them, he doesn't have them, because I am not in charge of making sure he's got his stuff anymore. That's his responsibility. So it's that, but it's that inclusion all the way through. It's having those expectations. It's, making sure that you're working towards things like you, Brendan, even, not even, but your college program you really wouldn't have been prepared to go off, because did you do the one in Massachusetts?
I went to BHMA. Yeah.
At you wouldn't have been prepared to go live at BHMA if you hadn't, worked on it all the way through school.
Right.
With what, and have those your parents and you having those expectations that you would be prepared to go and do. And so, but it's just, and if you don't want to hold a meeting, you can still send emails.
True. Very true.
I want to call a meeting, Jen.
I'm good at that. I'm good at sending emails and texts. I'm very good at text.
Well, text, I don't, I'm not necessarily a fan of text for when you're sending them to the school, because you've got them on your phone and you can track them, but it's much easier. Like if I end up being involved because, hey, I asked them for this stuff, it's easier to forward me the emails that were sent or to copy me on the emails. Even if I'm working with a family, I'll say, hey, if you're working on something and, you don't necessarily think you need me involved, you can still copy me so I can see what's going on. So it's easier through an email. And you really, if you're contacting about like, hey, I want to send, can something be changed on the IEP?
It's definitely.
Yeah, you definitely need to do it in an email so that the principal or special ed department can be involved in. And sometimes they might say, hey, it's small enough we can, do a quick phone call and we might be able to add it, or no, that's going to require a meeting. Let's, have a short meeting. If that's all you're asking about, we can, get an amendment to the IEP. IEPs can be amended at any time. So that it's important that, people know you don't have to wait a year.
Yeah. Well, so the other thing that I think is, it's just my opinion, but I think it's important for parents of people with Williams syndrome to remember that, life skills means that our kids can operate in the world, not around people with disabilities, right? So a lot of times, like, our kids get into these classes and they're around a group of other people with disabilities, right? But like, I am an advocate for inclusion, but I'm also an advocate for real life. And real life tells me that our kids are going to be out in the world with typical people more often than not. And we need to prepare them for that structure. Brendan, you're probably with, typical people more than you are with people with disabilities. And you need to be able to like feel comfortable in those settings.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, for sure.
And that's what, when they say, well, they need to learn life skills, I'm like, well, they're learning life skills in the classroom, because you're learning to sit and listen to the teacher. You're learning when you can talk, when's the appropriate time to talk. You're learning how to, you're required to get your school supplies together and get them out and have things done in a timely manner. And so you're learning all of those skills. You might not be learning how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but to me, Alex learned that on his own when he needed a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and I refused to make it. He, has slowly gotten better at them. But he can learn those things at home or in the college program that he did, because they eventually, had to make food. So that, he doesn't need to learn that in elementary school or even high school. He was learning so many other things in high school. He took a lot of music classes because that's his interest. And he was like, as other students were, they'd be like the teacher's assistant in classes. And he was a teaching assistant for one of the choirs. And he worked in the counselor's office, like taking notes to people. And, because other people did stuff like that too. And he could work on his homework in between. But, I wanted to make sure whatever jobs he was doing in high school were jobs that everybody else was doing too. And it was their way of learning, like doing homework teaches you, just like at a job, hey, you've got time to get things done and you've got to get it done at a certain time. And so, that learning that timing piece that, you're turning in your homework, you're showing up at a particular time, you're, dressing for, going to school. Well, but he learned, in high school, you dress in a certain way, and in college, you dress less. But, he slowly learned, the right way to, make sure things are, make sure your classes are clean. Just those things those are life skills that you learn by being in a classroom. In a general ed classroom, you learn a lot of life skills and they refer to them as the hidden curriculum in a school setting. It's part of the curriculum, but it's the hidden curriculum. And they'll say, a lot of times, like a child, they'll say, well, they don't know to raise their hand. They don't wait for other people. Well, if they're in a class of 5 or 6 and some of them may not even be verbal, then why would they ever learn to raise their hand or wait to talk or, listen in on a conversation and know when to come in on a conversation? That's still hard for me. But those types of things are hidden curriculum that is so important for all people to learn. And so you don't learn that, learning to stand in a line, wait your turn are important things for them to learn. We did not let somebody go into the cafeteria with them in school because we're like, he needs to learn to be able to go in a cafeteria. I don't want to have to be by him his entire life. So those types of things were important that he learn, what better place to learn to, buy things, but in the cafeteria. So, by high school, definitely we were, like saying, all right, you've got money on your card, go ahead. You can buy, items every so often or whatever. But that is a place that they can learn to spend money, do things in a kind of controlled atmosphere. So there's lots of ways to learn life skills without being
in the general ed classroom. Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. I agree with you. So you had mentioned that you have always been a part of the WSA, but now you're more formally on as a consultant. And the WSA offers to members, right, 2 hours every IEP year. Is that right? Or just 2 hours one time? I don't know what the difference is.
I don't know if it's one time. It's a good question, but I think it's one time. Okay. Is 2 hours. They get 2 hours of service, and there's myself, and then Robin Pegg is also doing education. So yes, they can contact there's an email address on the website. And we'll work with you to figure out the best use of time and figuring out, hey, what do you need? I mean, I had a mom call me, she doesn't have a child with Williams syndrome, but I worked with her a couple years ago, and it's time for that triennial report, and she's afraid her child might not qualify. After I talked to her, I really feel that she will, but we just talked through it. And she, after like a half hour, she's like, I feel so much better. I feel like I can go into the meeting. I don't know that I need you in the meeting, but I know, things to ask for. And then I told her if they don't agree, what to do next, what her next steps were. I said, there's ways to do things. And, the next step isn't, I disagree, due process. There's lots of steps in between that you can have. There's mediation, and it's across the country. IDEA says there'll be mediation available. So several families with Williams syndrome, we've requested mediators in different states, and we used a mediator just so that the school's listening to us, because sometimes they don't listen as well as they should. Even with me, they choose not to. They're like, well, this is the way we do it. Well, if I know that that's not really the law, then we'll say, hey, well, we'd like to hold another meeting and have a mediator present, because then they're not going to say that. But there's mediation, there's complaints. If you know that your IEP is not being followed, and it's pretty much black and white, they're supposed to be doing this and they're not. And I have in our district for my son, I think we wrote 3 over his, 13 years, or I guess 15 with preschool. We had to write several because we had teachers that chose not to follow. And we talked to, we didn't just say, well, write a complaint. We talked to them and say, hey, we're not getting this. We're not getting the study guide 3 days in advance, and it lists that in the IEP, and they would ignore it. And, and he's supposed to get papers like on the computer, things are supposed to be available on the computer, and they weren't. And so we finally, after we requested it a couple times and in writing, then we would write a complaint and say, hey, this isn't happening. We've tried. So, and then they usually bring in a mediator to mediate the complaint. So
this is all stuff that you are so amazing to help with. We should call you IEP consultant / therapist, because you are so
just
helpful
to the parents, just to bring them down, make it,
yeah, absolutely.
And you can you can email me, and I'll give you my phone number, and I have no trouble with just talking to you and saying life is good. You haven't messed up your child. Whatever program they're in, it's okay. We might tweak it, we might change it eventually, but wherever they are, it's all right. I don't want anyone to feel like, oh, I screwed up and my child is, hasn't gotten what they need. Don't ever feel that way, because we're all doing the best we can for our kids. So that's not the case. But yeah, sometimes I do. I'm like, oh, therapy, Michelle. And I have been doing the family support meetings. I have been doing the transition one, hosting that for Joel and for the WSA, the transition one, and occasionally I fill in for some of the others. But so even if you're in, it's really high school, but if you're looking at that transition piece into high school, by all means, it's a good place to start to say. And I know at one point I saw on Facebook, everybody was like, oh no, my kid's going, getting ready to go to high school. What do I do? I want to catch you before your kid's in high school to really make that transition piece good, to make sure that if you're looking at college programs, they're really ready for a college program. If you're looking at them doing getting a job as soon as that they're ready for that job when they graduate, because I do believe that extracurriculars are other kids. Brendan, did you do a lot of extracurriculars in high school?
Excuse me. I mostly did Best Buddies.
Okay. Were you in band or choir?
Oh, I was in band, I was in chorus.
Okay. Because to me, those are also those learning skills and those skill sets.
Yeah.
By being in band, being in choir, Best Buddies too, but looking at, like, what are the best electives so that my child's ready when they graduate from high school?
Do you believe it or not, but we are out of time.
No.
You're so amazing. We could just keep going.
Man, that was awesome.
Well, if we come up with another topic or another day. But yes, I mean, I've enjoyed this. I have not gotten to spend a lot of time with Brendan before. Jen, I've had, more conversations.
That's so much.
But yeah, I mean, my email address is on the website, on the WSA website. I'm happy to talk to any families. I Zoom into meetings all over the country at this point. So I'm happy to either be in the meeting, pre-read things, whatever works best, or, whatever a family wants. I work with them. So thank you. Thank you.
You've been listening to The Starry-Eyed Effect, presented by the Williams Syndrome Association. The show is hosted by Jennifer Keaton, Brendan Lemieux, and Stephanie Karen, and produced by me, Joel Listman. Theme song by Tommy Barbarella and Mariella Elm. Got a question for the show? Email us at podcast@williams-syndrome.org. Video version of the podcast available on YouTube at the Williams Syndrome Association channel. Review us on Apple Podcasts, and maybe it will get featured on a future episode. Make sure to like and subscribe to The Starry-Eyed Effect wherever you get your podcast delights.